Thanks for the opportunity to present tonight. It's going to be a brief update regarding our May forecast update. That's good. All right. So represented on this slide is our current fiscal year, so 2025 general fund. The general fund encompasses the majority of our revenues and expenditures, and that's where the district operations generally come from. We have other funds, bond retirement, capital improvements, student activities, those type of things. However, the general fund encompasses the majority of the district activities. As you can see on the slide, revenues for this year on the general fund total just a little bit over $85 million, and expenditures are coming in at $88,200,000. This is the first year since the community supported the 2020 levy that expenditures are exceeding revenues. You'll see in a later slide that that's the nature of school funding. A community passes a levy, brings in additional revenue, and then over time, those expenditures exceed the revenues that that levy brings in, and then that cash balance starts to go down. So again, that 2020 levy that was passed brought in $3.9 million in 2020. It brings in $3.9 million today. Something called House Bill 920 that was enacted back in 1976 limits the amount of money a levy can bring in based upon what it originally brought in when it was first passed. Overall, on our expenditures we're a personnel services business. Our costs are salaries and benefits. Putting teachers, administrators, administrative staff, custodials, our nutrition services staff, that's what we do. Anywhere between 80 and 85% of your expenditures are going to be in salaries and benefits. We're right in that kind of sweet spot. We're not above that 85%, but we're in that middle road there. The other component of that you'll see is, I jumped ahead. That was on the revenue side, sorry. You had a preemptive on the expenditures. So on the revenue side, roughly 60% of our revenues come from our local property taxes, and the other 27% comes from state funding. The 27% from state funding is a little misleading, though, because 6% of that actually is property tax reimbursements from the state. So the state funding component that we receive is actually about 21% of our overall revenues. Again, we are a local property tax-driven community. We rely on our community support levies in order to continue our operations. We're a guaranteed district. That roughly $18 million, that fair school funding plan and the restricted state funding, we've received that same amount of money since 2008, and we will continue to be a guaranteed district unless, of course, the state decides to reduce the guarantee. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. You already heard about expenditures. I won't go into that much more. However, purchase services makes up the other larger part of that. What comes out of purchase services? Again, our substitute costs, our transportation, repairs and maintenance, and utilities are the major components of that purchase services. And then the other slice of the pie there is supplies, capital outlay, and miscellaneous expenditures. So again, you heard me talk earlier about how revenues initially, when you pass the levy, will exceed expenditures. So on that first graph, you can see revenues are the blue line, expenditures are the orange line. You see that blue line remains pretty consistent, right? Unless we have a new levy, new operating dollars come in, our revenue does not grow. We're a guaranteed district, and again, we're limited by House Bill 920 on what those levies can bring in. Over time, because of natural inflation, expenditures will exceed that. And again, in 2025 is the first year expenditures exceed revenues. And you see that again, inflationary amount continue on through the 2029 fiscal year. The graph on the right shows our cash balance represented from one year to the next. And you can see, again, that cash balance declines over time as expenditures exceed revenues. Again, a community supports a levy, you build up a cash balance, and then as expenditures exceed those revenues, that cash balance goes down, which forces us to go to the community again for additional operating dollars. So part of what's going down at the state right now is every 2 years a biennial budget. And with the biennial budget, there's first the governor's proposal, and then there's the House makes their proposal, and then it goes to the Senate. So through the governor's proposal, and there'll be a graph later that'll show kind of what his proposal did to Lakewood City Schools, but this is an impact of what the House has proposed. What the House has proposed is flat funding for school districts. So again, Lakewood being a guaranteed district, from the state on the foundation or fair school funding plan, we're going to receive the same amount of dollars. However, in the House proposal, They are also recommending that if you have a cash balance that exceeds 108 days or 30%, that the local county budget commission, so the county auditor, county prosecutor, and county treasurer, can reduce the tax amounts that the community has supported in order to reduce your cash balance to that 108 days. So what they would have is it would be represented as a tax credit that would reduce, for Lakewood City Schools, that's approximately $14 million over a 2-year period. So a $7 million reduction in 2026 and an additional $7 million in 2027. What this graph represents is our cash balances on the blue, current forecast. If the House proposal was to go forward, you would see our cash balance depleted significantly by that proposal. One of the concerns we have with that, outside of the fact that they're taking away local control, our community has supported those levies, is the fact that how do you then propose a levy going forward? What do you put on the ballot that can, again, in school funding, build up a cash balance that in essence they will never let you collect on? So there's a lot of concern with that currently. So this graph represents, on the left side is our revenues, and on the right side of our expenditures. So the annual change in revenue historically was at 4%. And why is that? Well, we passed a new levy. That's how we had an annual increase in revenue. That's what's represented there. But you see going forward, our revenue is minimal, 0.19%. That's because, again, we're property tax driven, we're a guarantee district, so unless we go to the community and ask for additional dollars, there's no new revenue coming in. On the right side is expenditures. Historical expenditures were 3.58%, and then going forward, you see 4.2%. The 3.5% is a little bit lower, one, because we had pandemic dollars, so those dollars helped offset some of the general fund expenditures historically, so that's what drove that down. And then inflationary costs going forward, you know, that 4.2% is actually kind of right on par with inflation right now. So again, a representation of our cash balance on hand. You can see going back to 2021, the community supported a new levy. You see that cash balance go up. And then as expenditures exceed revenues, that cash balance goes down. And then this forecast, or what you see up here, represents the current forecast without the House proposal. So by 2029, we have 18 days of true cash. True cash is calculated by your total expenditures divided by 365 days to come up with a daily amount, and then you take that amount into what your cash balance is to come up with those days. The district has a cash balance policy that addresses this. We have a minimum cash balance policy of 90 days, and if we exceed 150 days, then the superintendent and myself will come to the board and explain how we're going to utilize those dollars, whether it's addressing the strategic plan, capital improvements, or those type of things. So we have a policy in place to address our cash balance. Again, just another graphical representation of what the House proposal would do to our cash balance on a daily basis. Here's our expenditure per pupil. Again, you can see a little dip in 2022. Again, part of that was offsetting some of our general fund expenditures to the federal relief program that was in place. And then you can see a gradual increase inflationary speaking. Just to note, in 2024, that $20,698, we were the 15th lowest expenditure per pupil in Cuyahoga County. So we're right in the middle of where dollars are being spent in regards to expenditure per pupil. Here again, a representation of 43% of our expenditures are borne by our local community. The other 57% is whether it's state, federal type of dollars. So this graph here shows on the left-hand side our revenue variance for, we do a forecast in November and May. On the left-hand side shows the variance from November to what we're updating now, and we have a positive variance. The majority of that is on our investment income. So our revenues on investment income are higher than we anticipated in November. And on the right side is our expenditure variance. We have a slightly negative expenditure variance of $106,000, but again, on an $88 million budget, I think we're in a pretty good estimate on that. So the last graph I'll have here, and then I'll open up for some questions, is the green line is the forecast as current law is in place. Guarantee district, House Bill 920, expenditures exceeding revenues. That green line shows our cash balance going down, however, still having a cash balance out there in FY29. The yellow line represents the governor's proposal. The governor's proposal had the, in essence, the guarantee going away. And so by reducing in each year of the next 2 years by 5% and 10%. So for Lakewood City Schools, that would be $900,000 next year, $1.8 million in FY27, and then $1.8 million thereafter. So an overall roughly about a $4.5 million reduction in revenue, and that's represented by the yellow line. The purple line represents the House proposal. Again, that's guarantee funding, however, that 30% cash balance reduction, or roughly $14 million in property taxes not being distributed to the Lakewood City Schools that the community has approved. So the process right now is at the Senate. I submitted written testimony to the Senate this week, again, arguing our case, arguing why they should not do that. We have a cash balance policy in place. Our community has supported those dollars in regards to what they expect from us in regards to educational programming, our dedication to fine arts and athletics, and those type of things. And we're, pleading with them to make sure this proposal goes away. What will happen with the Senate is they'll come up with their own proposal, and then the House and Senate will meet to work out the differences between the House proposal and the Senate proposal. And then it's called conference committee. And then once they work out all the differences between that, it'll go to the governor for signature. Questions? Sure.
It's my understanding that it's my understanding that then there'll be a rebate to property taxpayers. So
Yeah, so the example I've been giving, and again, for me, I always use easy numbers, right?
Yeah.
So this is
Me too.
hypothetical. So let's say your tax bill on a per half basis is $5,000. And in Lakewood, about 58% of that goes to the school, right? So that's roughly $2,900 of that, right, goes to the school district. The other $2,100 is split up between city, metro parks, port authority, those type of things. So that $2,900 in essence would be reduced almost in half. So your tax bill would go from $5,000 roughly down to say $3,600, but that $1,400 reduction would be on the backs of schools. It's not spread equally among the other governmental subdivisions. And it would show up on the tax bill as a credit that because the school's cash balance exceeded 30% or 108 days. Was that helpful?
yes, and then we wouldn't have our 90 days or our 30%, whatever the.
After the 2-year period, correct.
Right, and so then you would be on a 2-year levy cycle.
Correct. And again, so, most likely we'll be talking with the board about an additional operating levy in 2026. What that levy amount will be very determined upon what happens down at the state, right? Depending upon what they decide. Generally speaking, our community has been very supportive. Our last levy was in excess of 70% approval back in 2020. But that's because we've been able to stay off the ballot for every 6-year period, right? We had a 2013 levy, 2020 levy, and now most likely a 2026 levy. If this proposal was to go into place, most likely we'd have to have a levy on every 2 years for a smaller amount in order to stay below that 30% threshold, but still have sufficient operating dollars to operate the district.
And then, last question.
Sure. Never too many questions.
So it's not so if we pass in 26, it's only collectible for half of 27,
Correct.
and the full collection would not be till 28.
Correct.
So it's not like we get the money like in the January after it
Correct,
passes.
because tax year and calendar year and fiscal
Right.
years are split differently. So you don't get a full collection on any levy until 18 months after you've passed it.
Thanks.
So if they withhold the amount of levy tax money from us because of the 90 days, and then we drop below that 90 days, they don't then distribute that money to us, that money is just off the table.
Right, so how it's currently written is it falls to the Budget Commission. Again, those three individuals I mentioned, county auditor, county treasurer, and county prosecutor. Now, in Cuyahoga County, we don't have a county auditor per se. We have the fiscal, but we have those other positions. So what they do is they reduce the tax bill for that next year, right? And then that's over the next 2 fiscal years, those dollars are removed. The question is once you fall below the 90, then are they going to increase
Right.
the levy amount back up in order to maintain that 90? That's not in law. So once those dollars go away, they continue to be away.
Even though the voters have voted on them.
Correct.
So it's going against
Yeah.
what our local voters have voted on.
Correct.
And I know our local representatives, state senator and state representative, are doing what they can do, but they're clearly in the minority. But it seems like this is going to impact every school, so there's a possibility that school districts we don't normally have the common interest with, we
Yeah,
might on
this has garnered interest from all the state organizations, whether it's my professional organization, OASBO, BASA, which is the representative administrators, and the OSBA, which is
Yeah.
the school board's representation. We all are lobbying and advocating for what's right, on the Fair School Funding Plan, what's right in regards to the community support and not removing that, what they've provided to us by arbitrarily saying everyone should be at 30%.
Right.
And then also including with that, with the continuation of the Fair School Funding Plan, not reducing that guarantee. On top of that, you mentioned Senator Antonio. Her and I had a email conversation where she, again, is doing what she can.
Right.
And now, this is a Kent Zeman comment, not a comment by Lakewood City Schools or Lakewood Board of Education. I've been in this business for a long time. Every 2 years, we have a biennial budget. Every 2 years, there's something thrown at us, right? But I will say that this is the first time in the 30 years that I've been in this business that the tenor and the attitude and the perception at the state level is the most negative I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so there is a deep concern that somewhere along something's going to happen. Now, again, I'm not a Chicken Little, I'm not the sky is falling kind of person, but it's just that feeling, that sense, and it's not just coming from me, it's coming from a lot of my peers as well. So we're going to keep an eye on it, we're going to do what we can to advocate, and we'll know hopefully by June 30 what the result of it is.
So one could likely assume that, the governor's office had their proposal, the House had their proposal, Senate will have their proposal, and through reconciliation, there will likely be some proposal that will take more money away from public schools.
That would be a very good perception, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And will charter schools be impacted by?
Well, okay, so I wasn't going to talk about that. But there is, again, when it comes to school choice is a valuable thing. However, it needs to be on a level playing field. And right now, school choice is not a level playing field. Whether you talk about publicly funded community and charter schools or private school vouchers, the dollars that follow the child aren't then have the same restrictions that K-12 public
Right.
education has. In the governor's proposal and in the House proposal, both of those institutions, whether it's the private school vouchers or the community school vouchers, see increases, significant increases than the K-12 public education. In the governor's proposal, actually, there was a $103 million reduction in funding for K-12 schools and corresponding roughly $200 million to charter schools and $200 million to private school voucher increases. I wasn't going to talk about it, but you asked the question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. My questions have actually been answered. Just wanted to clarify one thing. It's June that this has to be
Well, yeah,
passed.
by law, the budget has to be signed by June. Only once in my career has it gone where they've had to do like a temporary budget where it's gone into July. I don't see that being an issue this time around. Actually, the Senate is due to vote the week of, what week is this? Is the 5th, 12th, the week of the 19th on the proposal. So it's moving very quickly as well.
Will we hear any more drafts or any updates before, once the Senate votes before the 30th of June?
So you would hope, but I can tell you what happened with the House process is that all, in essence, amendments were due by all the House representative members on a Tuesday, and then they voted on those amendments on Thursday without seeing any of those amendments that were part of the amicus amendments on that Thursday. So they were kind of voting sight unseen in regards to the House projects process. So
Party line
we're
vote.
not sure what's going to happen here at the Senate level, but we should have an inclination. Normally is how it works, but we'll see.
This is actually one of the most major assaults on public education. I mean, it's been coming and building, but this is the point where really it's just a full, like, let's just drive the public schools out of business.
Yeah. And again, I know Mrs. Clark's
And
that's
that's
the
not
question, but I have
hyperbole.
one other comment that's Kent Zeman's and not the Lakewood Board of Education or Lakewood City Schools. Advocation, right? We need community to advocate for this. What I've proposed for people to do is, again, reach out to Senator Antonio, reach out to legislators, whatever you can. However, one of the other key points of that is, with Governor DeWine, who's been a proponent, quite honestly, of K-12 education over the last parts of his career, but he has 2 years left. And does he want to be the governor that, in essence, destroys public education? That's the question I would pose to him.
Thank
So thank you for sending your written testimony. So I have a couple different things. Thanks for all that. Very glad you are the treasurer and not me, and so is everybody else in this room. So you submitted written testimony. Is there something that we can do as a board in the advocacy? Like, I can make my pitch to all of you,
Yeah,
take your.
again, you can write letters. You can, I can share the testimony with whomever would like it, and they could use that to submit their own written testimony. Advocate with Senator Antonio. In regards to the board, some boards have passed resolutions, but again, ultimately, unless it's submitted as written testimony, there's generally not much notice of that. Not that passing a resolution and advocating for K-12 public education isn't a great thing. We could draft something for that for the next board meeting, for sure.
Would any of you be supportive of that?
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so my next question kind of has to do with if the county auditor, we don't have one, the county treasurer and the prosecutor, when they're tasked with doing all this math and then figuring out what's a credit and what isn't, where are they on all this?
So the County Auditors Association, from my understanding, is opposed to this.
Oh.
Again, their comment was very similar to what President Katzenberger said earlier. Our community passed these levies in full knowledge of what those levies were to support and the dollar amount associated with those levies. Why should the county prosecutor, auditor, the budget commission, in essence, reduce what the community has supported? And why should it arbitrarily fall to them to do so? So that's from the County Auditors Association.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then when we talk about the 30%, how many dollars is that for us? Like, what does that look like?
Well, again, I went the wrong way.
Okay.
So, in essence, to get to here,
Okay, good, all right.
and I'll go back to, let's go all the way back here. I apologize. So we received roughly $52 million on an annual fiscal year basis, right, in property taxes. Reduce that by $14 million.
Wow.
So that 52 would go to 38.
And how often does that get recalculated?
Any year where you exceed 108 days or 30%, it's calculated. And then once you fall below that, there's no need to calculate it, but those dollars don't come back, is the way we understand it currently.
So you would need to pass a new levy?
Correct. And again, a levy that wouldn't exceed 30% or 108 days.
So as Mrs. Shaughnessy indicated, it would shorten the levy cycle significantly.
And probably put us in a catching up mode of the levy, in a levy cycle. Like, we're not supposed to run at a deficit, but we would almost have to.
Right. You'd always be, in essence, trying to catch up. You would never be able to get ahead of the game in this proposal.
So I was looking through historical things as they clean out things in my house. And this just, the amount of money that we're talking about now tops what I thought was an amazing amount of money, which was March of '09, the state just cut $1 million, like, one day. Like, they just said, you're cut $1 million. The same school year, the state cut us by 1.6 million more. And the next school year, an additional 4 million. And this was, it was just a decision by the state. And we had cut 5 million from our budget already to try to make the budget.
Right.
So, and '08, we all know was a catastrophic year economically, but it just guts a school district.
It's
It-
scary.
It guts program, yeah.
Anything else? Such good news I brought. Sorry about that.
Ray of sunshine.
You know, I do want to say one more thing, in that school choice, and there's value in that, because and I've gotten some interesting emails and even a phone call from people who don't live in Lakewood, who say, wow, I really want to move to Cleveland and move to Lakewood and raise my children and send them to the Lakewood City Schools, but your property values, I can't buy a house, I can't afford it, can you do something about it? And I'm like, aw, thank you for thinking I could actually do something about that, but no. And then they say, well, can I use a school choice voucher? I'm like, no, because the school choice vouchers are only for charter schools and private schools. And so you have choice until you don't. And so we cannot accept vouchers from anyone. Okay.